Welcome, everyone. Today, my guest has a 30-year career in the music industry as a sound engineer, musician, songwriter, and with bands of like Einsteinstrande, I can't ever say that, Neubauten, Fetus, KMFDM, and his own project, Pig. You can pick up the new album, Pain is God, which is available via download, vinyl, CD, maybe cassettes. And soon, if this pandemic keeps going, someone might discover 8 tracks in a thrift store and bring that format back out of sheer boredom. So thank you, audience, for allowing us access to your ears. And let's welcome a dear friend and family member, Mr. Raymond Watts. How are you, Raymond?
I'm fine. It's really good to be talking to you, Michael. And yeah, it's been a long time, so it's nice to hear your voice and to see you there as well.
Actually, yeah, likewise. It's fantastic to have you on, man. It's kind of like a Hollywood press junket thing that you got going on here. You've been on every podcast that I listen to and watch. So what's with the different marketing strategy this time?
Well, if you think about it, I mean, there was a plan before this shitstorm,
right?
That we would be, the album would have come out a little bit earlier. And there was talk of going on tour in the fall. I mean, I talked to Lex from Three Teeth. We'd been out in the UK sort of earlier, January, February here in the UK. We're thinking about going out towards the end of the year about now, October, November. It's now, of course, December. But obviously that's blown out the water. So I've had a chance to sit down and make some little video things with my friend Mark Griffiths, talking about promoting the record that way as there's no tour, and having more time to talk to lovely people such as yourself.
Oh, awesome. So we are going to talk about the new album Pain is God that was recently released. It was on Metropolis, correct? In the States? Okay.
The CD is on Metropolis with 14 tracks. Okay. And the vinyl, which is yet to be released,
and that's an Armalyte.
Is Armalyte, and that's 16 tracks. That's got a couple of bonuses.
Right. Okay. So, but let's get started. Let's get a little insight into early Raymond Watts. I guess the Pig origin story, as it were. So, where were the seeds of Pig put down, more or less? Like, how did this whole kind of idea of Pig birth itself?
Well, I'd been in bands when I was at school in the 70s, and then, of course, the punk rock thing happened. 78, I was thrown out of school, and I was in a band that ended up in Japan in 1981. We made an album in London. Ended up in Japan for like 5 or 6 months. I can't remember exactly. And it was a kind of pretend sort of trying to be a pop band. And I was absolutely gobsmacked at how I was there in this really sort of, it's kind of like a really cheesy pop band, actually. But I got out of it. I got out of it a really expensive bass guitar that I sold and traded that in when I got back to London for a little 8-track, and started making recordings with then sort of bands like Esch and Neubauten and Psychic TV and experimental bands, cutting tape loops and things. I found that a lot more interesting. Eventually, I moved to Germany, where I hooked up with Sasha and Esch, and we started doing the KMFDM thing at the same time as me giving birth to the Pig project. And there was a lot of crossover at that time. There were, a couple of songs on the first KMFDM album, but actually Pig songs, What Do You Know, Deutschland and the Unrestrained Use of Excessive Force. They were going on the first Pig album, but because it was just me, I wrote and recorded them. And so they sort of arrived, those projects, out of the influence of working with other more experimental bands, and from my point of view, being against everything. I just didn't want to fucking do mainstream pop music or rock and roll. I wanted to carve something new out.
And what I find interesting, though, is it sounds like a lot of your musical influences are from many different genres of music in their own right, pop in their era. So, there's a little bit of Latin influence. There's a little bit of I tend to feel like when I hear the horns and everything is almost like a big band kind of like appreciation in there. Is that fair to say? Because there is some of those elements in some of these songs that have that, like you're hearkening back to some of those classic sounds that again were pop in their time.
Yeah, I think, of course, this was, right at the advent of sampling,
right?
When Pig was born and KMFDM and those bands I was working with. And of course, to me, that just, I mean, there was a lot of sampling of sort of 2-bar drum beats and stuff, as you know. But I remember thinking, well, if you can sample that, you can sample big bands and this and that and all sorts of things. So basically, it just opened the canvas up and made it a lot wider. So that's where that came from.
You brought up an interesting point about sampling back in the day, and I remember talking to Nick or Esch. Many times when we're sitting backstage waiting to go on, just about what it was like, you know, in the early 80s with you guys in the studio, taking a piece of equipment and just basically trying to like squeeze as much blood out of that turnip as you possibly can. And I would just sit there and laugh and go, shit, you guys only had like 12 bits and so many megabytes of a card or disc, and you made these phenomenal like albums out of that. And do you feel that the technology now that you have the availability to do whatever you want, more or less, is more of a creative growth thing, or is it more like, shit, I got to be careful because I can't? Yeah.
I know what you're driving at. I think certainly with the amount of stuff you can have in one of these things, the millions of synths and presets and vast sample libraries, you do create a situation where it is the tyranny of choice run amok and run rampant. And the amount of possibilities, it's overwhelming. And I think that can dilute often and dissipate what's in here.
Right.
So I do think that I'm not harking back to a time and going, oh yeah, it was much better in my day when we had an 8-bit sampler with no editing, no saving. I mean, with the first 8-bit sampler I had, you couldn't store the sounds, you couldn't save them, you couldn't edit them. I could just loop them and I could CD and gate them from the SH-101. And from the rim trigger, I could sequence in sync with the 909. So that's how a lot of that early stuff was done. Wow. And it was 8-bit. It was grungy as fuck.
Yeah.
And so there was a sense of the narrowness of it made you push it further.
Right.
So as opposed to now, where, I mean, I can just, you know, I can't stand this tyranny of choice thing. I prefer a little bit sometimes. I just dial something up and I'll try and make it work. And because otherwise I just get lost.
Yeah,
I get lost easily. I lose myself in it. So I have to keep it, you know, less is more for me.
Yeah, it's like an analysis by paralysis kind of idea. It's like, you know, you could just keep dialing and twiddling. I mean, that's half of my problem too when I mix records or when I work on people's stuff. It's just, you know, I can sit here for hours and just hyper focus on a drum tone or trying to get the most like bottom end out of a mix without it being too muddy, and you could just really go nuts on it, and it's just it's insane. So let me ask you this though: do the messages in Pig's material now differ from the earlier material because of the, I guess, technological limitations plus the, I guess, frame of mind that you were in? And this will segue into further questions.
Just hang on. So it broke up a bit there. Are you saying has the message changed? Is that what you said?
Yeah. I mean, has the message from early Pig to more recent Pig changed?
No, actually, yeah, I get what you're saying. I think some of it. Some of the themes have maybe got a little bit broader, and maybe I'm a little bit. I write lyrics in a slightly different way now. Often we would just, you know, we'd get fucked up and just scribble things down. But I think that I was talking to Mark, who's been making this series of videos, little snippet videos of one from each track and the albums, which have been going on social media. I was talking to him about it because obviously we discuss what the theme is for the songs.
Right.
When, we go, well, what's this one about, and what we're going to do, and what's the thing, and where's the footage going to come from, and what's it going to look like, and what's it about? And I think it was quite funny. It's the same old shit you were writing about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, and all I can do is basically it's all coming from here.
Right.
And I think it's ironic. Somebody actually, weirdly, today is the anniversary of Sin, Sex and Salvation. It was released on Wax Tracks in '94. And I just put up some stuff earlier. And I just noticed someone made a comment. He said, God, those cut-ups, the stuff, the footage, the found footage, he said it's the same right-wing, fundamental fucking bullshit nutcases spouting the same shit in 2020 as they were in '94.
Exactly.
You know,
right.
However many years, and I thought that's true. Actually, I mean, probably the bullshit's got more extreme as time's gone on. You know. Yeah,
it's like you almost listen to a lot of early KMFDM where there's a lot of discussion about social justice and change and all that other stuff, and it's eerily similar that we're still having these same arguments, and it's a little bit more intense now, but it's essentially the same narrative over and over. You know what I mean?
I think maybe the thing that's changed is possibly the stuff that was seen as being more extreme attitudes were seen as being more marginalized. And because of the internet,
right,
some of the more extreme viewpoints seem to have been able to spread, and misinformation and,
right,
you know, all it fucking whatever he talks about, that lunatic Trump. What does he talk about? Alternative facts or what's it?
Yeah. Fake news.
Yeah, and so there really is it's really difficult now. There is just so much spewing poison and bullshit and misinformation that things are even more difficult and the truth is even more opaque now.
You're right, exactly. I mean, you know, and sometimes I wonder if that's a good thing also, to have a little bit too much media and too much democratization of media, because it almost just invites some misinformation and just wrong stuff in general. You know, like wrong facts, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you have this thing like here in the UK. You know, the BBC like to have. In the news, they like to portray balance. So, for example, if 98% of scientists say the world is warming because of carbon emissions and stuff, they have to balance it. So if 2% of the scientists say, oh, no, that's a crock of shit, they will still give somebody from the 2% as much time to have a balanced argument. Now, that's a great idea, but it's also giving the oxygen of publicity, I think, to quote Margaret Thatcher, weirdly,
right,
to you know, some pretty fucking crackpot ideas sometimes get quite a big stage to spout from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, I think a lot of that problem is that, you know, I think it's okay to be fair and balanced. I hate using Fox News's thing, but it's okay to be fair and balanced to an extent. But yeah, you're right. You know, you're giving some credence to and legitimacy to some, you know, whack job theories in that respect as well. I mean, I think it's fair to be accurate and balanced, but you know, you can't control how people take that information and dissect it. You know what I mean? That's the problem. Yeah. I think is too much ability to dissect that information and connect dots. You know what I mean? That's where it gets crazy. So listen, you've been outspoken about your own like personal sort of struggles, especially with drugs and alcohol, and then you ended up in rehab. I'm curious, where is like where does the gospel church religious theme come in the recent incarnation of Pig versus before? I don't ever really remember that being a theme. It seems like that's a theme now. Is that something that you feel like just kind of creeped in because is like a rebirth of your life and your career, because you had that really tough period and you've kind of fixed your life and come back in more healthy, conscious ways?
I love that. Fixed my life. I wish.
You know, yeah. I don't think we're. Yeah.
Fixed my life. Everything's fabulous now. Well, no, actually, I've always had that kind of interest in in religion, and you know, televangelism has always been fascinating to me. And actually, I think maybe it's not quite so overt, my interest, or its appearance in Pig Records prior to me taking a long hiatus from the early 2000s to 2016 and the gospel. It is a very, for me, it's just quite interesting, that thing, because I don't know how to articulate it. There must be something of, it's endlessly fascinating and endlessly needed, but there is it's so open to exploitation and twisting, but it's also incredibly beautiful. I mean, I think I don't believe in God, but I do think that organized religion has provided, maybe because it was the only conduit for artists, some of the most fantastic devotional music and architecture, art, and ceremony. And I think that's important to people. I mean, going to gigs is a bit of a ceremony.
Yeah, and community,
you know,
yeah.
That kind of thing, you know, when the lights go down and people whistle and the band come on, and the kind of communing. And look at it, people are missing gigs at the moment, you know.
Yep.
And it is like, for some people, going to fucking church.
It is a church, right?
And so there is something about that kind of channeling that I find really fascinating, and also I find it's, I hate to say, you know, really quite funny as well as being quite interesting, and it really it attracts some of the most wacko people, you know.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, but all power to it. People need that stuff. People need to plug in. People need to commune. A lot of people would look at people who go to heavy metal gigs and see those guys going round and round endlessly in the mosh thing, or the pig, or whatever they call it, and just go, that is such a weird thing. It's so interesting.
Well, yeah, they should go to a Jewish wedding right after that, because they do the same thing in Jewish weddings.
There you go. Wow. I mean, it's, you know, humanity, endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. You know, I when I went to my first Jewish wedding, it was, I'm like, oh my God, these guys it's like a big giant mosh pit, except they're not, you know, knocking each other down or anything. And it's just, you know, things that people do that are eerily similar to things in a different context. It's just amazing. I do find that interesting, fascinating as well.
Let me interject and ask you, then, sure. Do you think, I mean, apart from, so you've heard the pig stuff since I came back, the gospel.
Oh yeah, yep.
And you've heard Risen, and you've heard Pain is God. I mean, there've been some other releases, but those basic, you know, the three legs of the thing that, you know, support pig since it's come back.
Right.
What do you think is the difference between this stuff and the previous stuff?
Oh, wow. I think a lot of it seems the overarching theme, the message about, you know, that has that religious kind of connotation to it. And interesting, like playing in the dark side of that end of the world, not end of the world as a thing, but, I find that interesting. The earlier stuff, it just seemed like, it seemed like it was, you're going through your life and your struggle, you know, with drugs and alcohol and a different mindset, I guess. And it seemed, I get this sense of like a little bit of a self-deprecation kind of thing of what Pig represented itself as, graphic image wise, on the album covers and everything. And here it's more of, now it just seems more of like very much like a rebirth, like a, you're now older, wiser, and you're gathering those who have been in similar situations, and you're creating a community and saying, we could still, dabble in the dark side of everything, but we have a safety in this church, this community that it is Pig. You know what I mean?
That's interesting. Yeah. I do think, going back to the sort of the difference between that stuff, this stuff, I mean, I was juggling I was a sort of poly addict. I was addicted to heroin, cocaine, crack, benzos, booze, you name it.
Wow.
And so it was quite a lot of shit going on there. And also it was very, very extreme where I was. So and that was reflected in the delivery of the art I was doing.
Right.
And also where it started in the 80s, right? So it kind of relates back a bit. When I left the UK to move to Hamburg in like 84, 85, after a year, I had my studio in Hamburg, but I started moving to West Berlin. And West Berlin, I started working in West Berlin, so I moved there for 5 years from sort of 85 to early 90. 86, I suppose. It was just the beginning of 86 to early 90. And that was the front line of what the Cold War was. There was a fucking wall around it. There were Russian guards. There were East German guards. And it really felt, particularly earlier in the 80s, when Reagan and Thatcher were in there, it really felt like any minute there could have been the big red button that had been pressed, and there was going to be, a new Holocaust. And so I was drawn to going to the front line. And Berlin was quite a weird city. It's surrounded by East Germany, with a wall around it, with minefields. It wasn't actually part of West Germany. It was run by East Berlin was run by the Russians. West Berlin was run by the French, the Americans, and the British. Right. So kids who didn't want to do national service in West Germany would escape. It wasn't controlled by Bonn and the West German government. So it was a kind of an escape place for people. You could avoid military service, and artists went there, people like me from other countries, and it was like being in the front lines of the trenches of the Cold War, and it was very hedonistic. You could set up a bar in your living room and you could just get people in. It was very loose.
Wow.
And so that sort of set the template for where Pig started. And I started, I think, into a kind of descent of where I just always wanted to change. I did a couple of albums with KMFDM. I got bored. I wanted to do something more experimental, more extreme. It was always more extreme, weirder, generally darker, and descent into the darkest places I could find within myself, which meant going to some pretty weird places physically.
Right. And do you think,
with my body, what I was doing with my body to my mind, staying up for days and days, ingesting whatever I could. And then that would manifest in some pretty weird music.
Right.
And that continued all the way through the 90s. I came back to the UK and was spending a lot of time in Japan, and then really hooked up with the KMFDM guys, writing with them again. And we were out in Seattle recording that stuff in the mid-90s and onwards, and they were all like in the studio. I was working on these albums and songs with them and touring, but I was off half the time in the most dodgy parts of town, scoring, getting in real scrapes, coming back, getting fucked out of my skull, contributing, but I was slightly in a different place, I felt.
Wow. Yeah. So it's a fascinating thing to want to artistically find yourself and really get in there, in that soul, that space that is, your inner core of you, using, drugs and alcohol and everything. And it ends up, providing you with some amazing creative art, but also damages you at the same time. It's just,
you hit the buffers. Yeah. You're right. After a while, you always want to, I was just going, where do I go from here?
Yeah,
where do I go? What am I going to write about next? What the fuck have I got to do? Have I got to fucking top myself? But then I can't come back and write about it.
Yeah.
So it was it sort of hit the buffers and it ended. I just didn't know where to go. And also I was doing Shaft, Fine, KMFDM, Pig, and it was just non-stop, locking myself in my studio the whole time for days and days, getting absolutely obliterated, writing some really weird music. And then eventually, I'm really actually glad that it stopped.
Yeah.
Because I needed to just go away from it for years and years.
Yeah. Do you think that the irony of that being so busy, but still doing a lot of drugs and alcohol, but still being so busy might have saved your life in some weird way, because you were busy, you were creating, but which didn't lend yourself to getting so messed up, because you had idle time. You know what I mean? You were busy. So it did keep you moving forward in some respects.
Yeah. I mean, basically, it's having something to, even though I was fucked up, there was something to be said for,
there was a goal there. There was a goal.
Having something to do, having someone to love, and having something to look forward to,
Right.
and having something to look forward to, something to do is really important for me.
Yep. I know. You mentioned working in Japan. I've always noticed that the Japanese records that you put out have different songs on them or different versions. And was that something that was that was planned? And is that a thing that you're still doing now? Or was that, again, just something because it just kept you busy?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of, just make the discography a bit more interesting, change the tracks around on the US version from the American version. And sometimes they go, oh, I've got some extra shit here. What am I going to do? I'll put it on that one, take those ones off. And we still do that to a certain extent.
Yeah, because the vinyl
not to be awkward, but just to make things a bit more interesting,
right?
A bit less boring.
Like the vinyl has two tracks on it that the album doesn't have, right? Yeah. This one, yeah. So let's get into Pain is God, and we can just kind of like get to the end of this because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But I want to talk about Pain is God, the record that just came out. How was the collaborative effort during the global pandemic and this whole thing? Like, did you feel like you worked the same, or was there a little bit more kind of difficulty here and there?
No, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was already in the trenches of doing this fucking record when the shitstorm landed. And so outwardly, my life didn't change that much. I'm still sort of sending vocal files to Esch, files to Esch in Berlin to do vocals, bits of guitar he did. Same with Steve White in Seattle. Michelle, who's in Australia, I sent her stuff. So, Sasha Gray in LA, she stuff, it was all by sending files, which used not to be my favorite way of working, but, needs must.
Yeah, that's how it works.
And it's just, obviously there was no tour happening. There's going to be, God knows if that'll ever start. So I just spent an extra couple of months on the album, released it so I could work on it a little bit longer. And yeah, that's how it's been.
Yeah. During making this record, since you've been in this quarantine environment, like, I know you and Sasha have, more or less are on speaking terms. You worked on a track on the last album that he was working on. Has there been any further, taking advantage of this opportunity that is the pandemic and maybe working together a little bit more on some things, or expanding that relationship?
We did talk about some things, but I think he's doing a record with Lucia, a solo record of hers. So he's got some things. I've got a few things. There's nothing planned, but they never know.
Yeah, I mean, you figure you guys have mended a little bit of that relationship. It would be kind of cool to say, well, we have this opportunity. Let's see, if we work on one more other track, see where that goes.
I mean, we did some. I mean, I'm really proud of the work I did with those guys, and I think it really stands up over time. It's some really good stuff there, and I think. I don't know. There was something about the way it worked. For example, some of those things. Some of the people in the orbit. When Bill Rieflin came in and did things, or Nihil, or some of Gunter's guitar stuff just was next level. And Esch, when Nick just brings something, and it's just like he brings a little bit of magic dust, and you just go, "Fuck it up! Where the fuck did that fall from?" He's just painted out there. And he seems so well. I spoke to Nick, or Esch, as people know him, the other day.
Oh, good.
He looks fantastic.
Oh, good.
He's clean and sober and fucking really looking great. And
I miss him very much. I sent him text messages here and there to ask him how he's doing, and I'm sure he's busy and everything. But I was genuinely concerned from the last time you guys came to New York, and he was in a little bit of in some pain here and there with his lower back. So I'm happy to hear that he feels better. So that's good. I'm glad to hear that. I am digging the new album, and a few of my favorites are Kicking Ass, and what is the other one here that I really dig a lot? I like the sort of, I guess, moodiness of, is it Confession, the Sacrificial mix? I'm really digging that stuff. I like the celebratory darkness industrial vibe again, which is like, the horns and everything, but it's still there. What songs really stick out to you personally? And, meaning like which song when you were creating it was the one that gave you the chills more or less? You know what I mean? You know how that goes.
Well, it's an interesting question that actually, because when I was going, oh, look, I'll do Kicking Ass because it's like something I know, and it's such shared territory with me and Esch, and then it was fun to get Sasha and stuff, but I kind of knew what it was going to be like. Mm-hmm. Working on songs Suffer No More was quite weird the way that turned out. That's the final track on the album, because that's some shit that I had lying around. Actually, that goes back to the last bit of shit I wrote before I stopped for over 10 years. There was some stuff lying around, none of the vocal lines, but chord progression and stuff.
Right.
Basically. Well, they've been kicking around since like 2003. Wow. 2004. So when it started coming together with that sort of gospel-y vocal thing going on and that kind of lyric and stuff, I was like, where the fuck did that come from? So half the time I'm kind of going, Jesus, this is weird. Did I write? What the fuck is that way? And also it's quite weird because I don't know where this stuff comes from. I mean, the lyrics also, I just write and then I bash them into shape, and hopefully I'm going, what the fuck is this? What's all that? Oh, I see what it's about. So I'm just like somebody else, reading it, listening to it, hearing it often for the first time. So, whatever you call it, your muse, your channeling, what the fuck ever. I find, and I don't really want to know too much about it. If it comes, whatever that is, when the spirit is upon me, then, whoa, hallelujah.
Yeah. I find the same thing. Like, I'll go through an archive of chord progressions that I've done, stuff that I've sent to Nick for Slick Idiot back in the day. And I'll go back to that and just go, where did this come from? Who did this? And it's just an amazing revisiting of writing something at the time that maybe didn't have a place to reside and needed a couple of, like maybe a decade or so for it to sort of mature, sitting on a hard drive. And then you just kind of, those happy accidents are amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's all weird.
Yeah. So Raymond, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate talking to you. I hope you had a great chat here. I think we covered quite a bit of some interesting territory.
Yeah, no, the only thing is I don't think we talk quite enough about drugs. That's the most interesting. We didn't really cover every corner of that particular sordid cupboard, because I tell you, man, there's a whole load more shit that needs to be swept out of there and smeared all over the internet.
I would love to do that with you. We'll definitely go there, because I'm sure I have my own level of stories that I can smear on there too. So yeah, let's do that. Thank you.
Listen, when I next see you, man, I hope we are going to sort of hook up in the not too distant. So let's hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and see where it goes.
Let's all hang in there, and then we owe each other like long hugs and everything. I just spoke to Nicole Blackman, left her a message on her phone the other day to tell her happy birthday. So I'm just trying to keep in touch with everybody, and just hopefully that everybody's still making it through this thing, and when we see each other again, it's gonna be crazy. I think it's gonna be really emotional and relieving at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, as long as everyone takes the fucking vaccine, let's hope that.
Yeah, I know, right? Thank you, Raymond. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking out the time and moving the schedule around. I appreciate it.
Cheers. All the best.
I will talk to you soon. Please keep in touch.